In the middle of the 2000s, Marvel and DC both had the same idea. Let's make an edgy 3D fighting game that 12-year-old boys will love. And so, we got Marvel Nemesis, Rise of the Imperfects, and Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Two games with massive superhero rosters that have been forgotten to time and replaced in the gamer zeitgeist by the constant churn of Spider-Man games, the Arkham series, and even a spiritual successor in the Injustice franchise. These 2000s games are by no means great. They are pretty flawed, and at times downright awful, but they each have a certain charm to them that games in the current superhero environment just can't capture. If you're a fan of either comic book universe or fighting games in general, I think these are two games worth being preserved in more than just the minds of those who were in the target demographic at release, like I was. Released in 2005 after an unexpected partnership between EA and Marvel that was supposed to capture the same magic as Capcom and Marvel, Rise of the Imperfects is a strange game. But when it was released, I thought it was so cool. In the pre-MCU days, Marvel was actually able to get grimy with its properties and appeal to hardcore dude bros like my 10-year-old self. It may be a little dated in its early 2000s punk attitude, but that's part of the charm. I do think this game is pretty enjoyable. That's partially tainted by my nostalgia, but when the gameplay comes together, it really does feel like a satisfying and unique fighter. The roster for this game is made up of characters that nowadays may feel B or C list, but these are all dudes who used to be at the top of Marvel's world. The Thing, Wolverine, Storm, Elektra, Daredevil, Spider-Man, Venom, Iron Man, the Human Torch, Magneto, the Wink, Fault Zone, Johnny Ohm, Solara, Hazmat, Brigade, and Paragon. You may be thinking, who the hell were the last few? Well, those are the titular Imperfects, EA's original characters designed for this game, who I'll be forced to talk about when we get to the story. The Marvel lineup is the real star here. At the time, Iron Man was the strange character to include in this game, not Johnny Storm. Spider-Man's always been the golden boy, though. Ain't that right, webhead?
You know what we call that? We call that a web-slinging ass-kicking.
Oh, that's right. Spidey's got that New York edge. This ain't no mumbling Holland, no spindly Garfield, no dinky Toby. This choice of characters adds to the overall atmosphere of the game that I find refreshing, especially compared to present day where everything Marvel is so polished. I appreciate the grungy and grimy feeling of this apocalyptic New York where the most fantastical setting is some sci-fi lab. However, we don't see a lot of the characters in this game outside of 20-second cutscenes that amount to nothing. I think everything is here for a damn good game. The gameplay isn't perfect, but I can forgive imperfection. The problem's that there is no story. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe had the benefit of working with an already established property and a studio that knew how to make fighters. Released in 2008, this was the last game published by Midway Studios before they were acquired by Warner Bros. Originally, plans were in place to release Mortal Kombat 8, but after some behind-the-scenes maneuvering, that game turned into this cross-universe 3D fighter, which is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. Take DC characters, stick them in a weird, watered-down Mortal Kombat for teens, and we've got one weird, yet pretty satisfying game. I'm by no means a Mortal Kombat expert. I've played some of the original arcade versions over the years, but I'm more familiar with MK9 and onward. In fact, this game is what got me interested in Mortal Kombat as a franchise, which means the corporate synergy strategy worked on my 13-year-old mind. My point is, I'm not familiar with what mechanics are brand new or not, but this game does feel unique and refreshing. It doesn't feel like any recent NetherRealm game, Mortal Kombat, or Injustice. It feels like its own thing. If you've played any of the games I just mentioned, then the story structure of MK vs. DC should be very familiar to you. The characters you play in the story mode are The Flash, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Captain Marvel, this is before he got his New 52 Shazam reboot, the Joker, Lex Luthor, and Superman. On the Mortal Kombat side, you play as Liu Kang, Sonya Blade, Jax, Sub-Zero, Scorpion, Shang Tsung, and Raiden. Other additional playable characters that don't have their own story chapters include Catwoman, Deathstroke, Darkseid, Baraka, Kano, Katana, and Shao Kahn. Unlike with Marvel Nemesis, the story of MK vs. DC is one of the highlights of the game. Not because of how brilliant it was, but because of how well balanced it was. But with all that background and introduction out of the way, let's look back at the gameplay each of these brought to the table. Of these two games, Marvel Nemesis has the most unique gameplay. At its core, it's a simple 3D fighting game where you'll want to smash your opponent with hit after hit until they're ragdolled on the ground. The big appeal though is that every character plays differently. Spider-Man can zip around, Wolverine can pop his claws, Iron Man can fly, Storm can hit you with a lightning bolt. Not every single character is super unique from each other. Venom and Spider-Man are near identical, Johnny Ohm is just a male Storm ripoff, the Human Torch, Iron Man, and Magneto are surprisingly similar. But it's the differences across the roster that make this game fun and makes you want to fight each character as each character to see how they stack up. Some dudes are tougher, taking less damage, and are able to throw heavier objects on the arena. The Thing is a tank in this game, whereas Daredevil is a quick, nimble ninja. The story mode gameplay differs somewhat from the Versus gameplay. In the story, you go through long stretches of levels beating up these small fry alien dudes. There are different types that mix things up, but for the most part, it's your superpowered ass crushing untold numbers of aliens with the occasional puzzle, and I use that word lightly. Personally, I think the story gameplay isn't that fun. It's the duels where this game really shines. Since the characters have those key differences, it makes for pretty fun combat experiences. Having Wolverine pull off an air throw where he jumps up, impales the Human Torch with his claws, and tosses his ass onto the concrete is just satisfying. Grabbing Spider-Man by his tiny head, crunching him down onto the concrete, and then tossing him is just... oh. I guess I really like the throwing in this game. Grabbing Magneto's feet with Venom's web, yanking him off the concrete. Yeah, so the combat isn't the most inventive thing in the world. Most characters have some form of projectile attack, everyone has close combat, and there is a rage meter, which allows you to temporarily use special moves without burning any stamina. I do think that the maps in the game are pretty weak. The best one, by far, is the rooftop of the Daily Bugle, because it's filled to the brim with shit to throw at each other, including these massive exploding gas tanks, but also, it's the best map for ringouts. Ringouts are the most satisfying aspect of this game, and probably why, when I think back on the gameplay, I'm all about the throws. Hurling a dude straight off the map was always the dickhead thing to do, and I remember playing with my little brother when this first came out, and absolutely chucking his ass off the Daily Bugle every single time. This game is only for hardcore dudes. The rest of the maps are eh. At the end of the day, the gameplay isn't particularly special, but the highlights are the unique movement and attack features for each character, and the monkey brain thrills of tossing an enemy into the void, no matter how unrealistic it may be. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, on the other hand, is something that most gamers will be somewhat familiar with. It's largely your basic Mortal Kombat gameplay with the notable difference of 3D movement. You can engage in a lovely dance between two cold-blooded murderers trying to outfox the other, figure out the perfect line of attack, only to get kicked right in the shin at the last second. It makes things feel a bit more strategic than a typical side-scrolling stage fighter. Now, you can maneuver to get the perfect angle for a throw, or you can sidestep an attack and counter with your own. Based on some research, this actually fit right into the Mortal Kombat playstyle at the time, although it has since gone back to its 2D roots. So this wasn't anything new for a fan of that franchise. The uniquity came from getting some DC freaks into the bloody mess, but that's where another change came in. Daddy Warner didn't want Wonder Woman's spine yanked out or Superman's head sawed in two, so unsurprisingly, this game was rated T for teens. There are fatalities, but the gore is dramatically reduced, resulting in mostly burning, shooting, or neck-snapping deaths, whereas the DC heroes had rebranded heroic brutalities where they don't outright murder their opponent. These usually end in some kind of pavement pummeling, or Batman traumatically scarring his opponent into a psychotic break with a swarm of bats. Heroic stuff. But the most unique aspects of the gameplay are the free-fall combat and the close combat. One of these is really fun and exciting, while the other is sluggish and lame. It had been at least 10 years before I replayed this game, but the one thing I remembered about it was tossing dudes off the stage and pummeling them in mid-air. This is so satisfying to perform and also to counter. If you manage to counter this, you transfer all the damage you've taken to your opponent, and the only thing more satisfying is if you counter a counter. That's sheer orgasm status. I think we're learning I have some tossing fetish today. Punch, kick, or throw your opponent over the edge and beat the shit out of them on the way down. Also, on certain maps that don't have ledges, there is an alternate move where you smash your opponent through a wall and button mash to determine damage. That can't be countered, but it can be nullified. It's simple monkey brain stuff, but it's just so good. Close combat is the opposite. Grab an opponent and lock him into this weird button-mashing punch-a-thon. It uses the same basic mechanics as the freefall combat, but with none of the charm or excitement. It's really just basic hits that would be more satisfying in the standard playstyle. Honestly, it just felt like they didn't know what to do with the R1 button, and this is what they came up with. Really lame. Don't have much else to say about it. Also, strangely enough, this game has its own rage feature, which gives the characters buffs and special abilities. That's mid-2000s gamer boy energy right there. We're tough, and we rage! But unlike with Marvel Nemesis, the combat rage actually does have some story implications, so why don't we head down that rabbit hole? Let's start with Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, because the story is really basic, but at least it exists. First off, you get to choose which universe you want to play as, Mortal Kombat or DC. The best part is, if you want to go back and forth with each universe, you can at any time. Playing the DC story doesn't mean you have to beat it before playing the MK story, and vice versa. As the DC shill that I am, I played as my baby boys first, and the basic structure for each universe is the same, except for DC, you get one additional chapter. You play as X character for 4 fights, then the chapter changes and you play as a new character. This goes on for 8 chapters and the game ends, or 7 if you're playing the Mortal Kombat story, because God forbid they just let you play a chapter as Kano. The story plays in the sandbox of both universes in a fun enough way. Concurrently across dimensions, both groups of protagonists have defeated their big bad. The Justice League has beat Darkseid, and Shao Kahn has been defeated by the Mortal Kombat warriors. Just as both big villains are about to portal away, they are hit by the leaders of each team, and this somehow causes a universal rift, which merges Darkseid and Shao Kahn into a being known as Dark Kahn. The universes of DC and Mortal Kombat also begin to merge, and with it, a mysterious force known as Combat Rage begins to infect all the characters involved. It's used to justify why the good guys suddenly rage out and want to beat the piss out of each other. It's not subtle, but it does drive forward action that otherwise would be absurdly out of character. Essentially, the story boils down to a series of massive misunderstandings, while both rosters try to save their universe. During this process, the characters fight against their own universe, or the other universe, which eventually leads to an epic showdown in the final chapters of each storyline, where Raiden and Superman clash before realizing they both want the same thing, and then take down Dark Kahn, separating their universes and saving the day. While the storylines are fairly two-dimensional, I'd say that every one of the characters gets a fun moment, and it was cool to see them all interact. Fighting Scorpion in the Batcave, or hitting Captain Marvel with the bicycle kick, were fanboy moments for both sides. The most impressive part of the story to me is how the two storylines tie into each other. You really can't get the full picture of exactly what went down without playing both versions of events, and while it's not like there was any big twist, I did appreciate that attention to detail. They definitely didn't have to put in that effort, and I thought it was a nice touch. Overall, the story is a solid 6 out of 10. Shallow, but serviceable. I don't think I've ever played a game that pretends to have a plot like Marvel Nemesis. From the very beginning, the player is presented with an illusion of something deeper going on, but the story boils down to a loose excuse to tie the action together. The initial pitch is that there are aliens invading the planet, you are a Marvel superhero who fights them, and that's really it. These random dudes called the Imperfects occasionally show up to kill a superhero, but then it's right back to another superhero bashing aliens. Repeat, the end. Let's get into the nitty-gritty so you see what I mean. The game starts you off as Ben Grimm, the Thing, taking a leisurely stroll around town, showing off his amazing nippleless chest. That's when aliens begin to attack, and the Thing kills them all, but manages to interrogate one who is like, "Mwahaha, bad stuff is coming." And we cut to this absolutely sick scene.
This is a News 12 special report.
New York City under attack from unidentified forces. We join Claire Strauss live on the scene.
Crazy out here. I have never seen anything like this. The streets are filled with debris. There are bodies. We're just trying to take cover. Oh, did you see that? Where's Captain America? Oh, this is horrible. The attackers, they seem to be coming out of nowhere. We've had unconfirmed reports that the Punisher is missing in action. Jim, are you getting this? Is that the Hulk? Hold on. Wait a minute. Hold on.
Obviously, there is no rhyme or reason as to why the Hulk is instantly killed by these aliens, but Elektra is able to fight dozens of them no problem. I'm not quite sure why the characters in this game were chosen, but a lot of them were from recent or upcoming movies. Hell, I'm surprised Blade isn't in this game. That would have been sick. Anyway, so you play a couple missions as the Thing, and at the end of the third one, Wolverine pops up nearby in a cutscene. The two don't acknowledge each other at all. No, he's just like, "Hey, play as me now, bub." And so you do. You play as him for 3 missions. At the end of the last one in Avengers Mansion, Elektra pops up in a cutscene and says some vague nothingness, but has no interaction with Wolverine. Then you can play as her. Are you noticing a pattern here? There is no connective tissue in this game at all. It was almost like the writers were afraid to have the playable characters come anywhere near each other, even though the transition is always in the same location. I'm not asking for much here. Elektra could just somersault in and be like, "Hey Logan, have you seen Daredevil?" He could say, I don't even know him, bub." Then somersault away. Elektra shrugs to camera, and that's our wacky setup for a new playable character. In an ideal world, I'd want more than that, but doesn't that seem like the absolute bare minimum? Somehow, this game doesn't even reach the minimum, and that's its greatest problem. But at the end, it suddenly goes balls to the wall insane. To understand the ending, you have to understand the Imperfects. As the game went on, chapter after chapter, it would suddenly be time to kick a Marvel character's ass as an Imperfect. Before the match, there would be this super grimy montage explaining the Imperfects' backstory from Dr. Niles Van Rokel's point of view, which would then transition to the Imperfect describing their motivation. The direct implication is the good doctor set up the tragedy that struck them for the purpose of experimentation. He is the mysterious force behind the game, but there's more. Even less often, the game would have you play a mission as Paragon, this lab experiment ancient woman who is the peak of the Doctor's work. Throughout the game, she is slowly rebelling against the Doctor, and the closest this game comes to having any through line with the Marvel characters is when Magneto finds her in an alley and tries to manipulate her. Doesn't exactly work. The final mission is Paragon going to get her revenge on Rokel, but after she defeats him, it turns out he's an alien. He's one of the few survivors of his conquered homeworld who is creating the Imperfects as an army to take it back. But most importantly, look at his stupid glossy human head. So gross. I hate that shot so much. Anyway, he begs for forgiveness from Paragon, essentially tells her, "It's your problem now," and dies. Then Paragon poses dramatically with the rest of the Imperfects, and the game ends. What the hell is going on? I don't hate any of that, but doesn't it just seem like the setup for a game rather than the ending to one? And also, what the hell does any of that have to do with Marvel? Marvel just feels so tacked on to this story. Like, why did Storm or Venom have to be part of this at all? I have to give the story for this game a generous 3 out of 10. Stylistically interesting, with no meat on the bones until the very last second. It's clear to me that Marvel Nemesis' story suffered for one key reason: the partnership with EA. This feels like a game that was designed to backdoor pilot a new collection of EA original characters by using the Marvel fanbase. The game largely focuses on the Marvel characters, but uses them to set up a wholly original plot for a sequel that has nothing to do with anything Marvel. Throughout the game, the different companies' characters barely interact. And when they do, it's typically a big dramatic showcase of the EA characters smacking around the Marvel ones. Of course, there are fights where the Marvel characters win, but at the end of the day, the Imperfects always won by design. It felt like EA didn't want to tie its characters too closely to Marvel because they wanted to spin off their own series, and it's obvious why that failed. On the other hand, look at DC and Mortal Kombat. This game actually kicked off an unexpected ongoing partnership between the two universes. The big caveat here is that Warner owns both properties, so that's a huge help. But I think it's a partnership fans actively enjoy seeing. Nearly 10 years later, Injustice 2, a game about DC characters made by NetherRealm Studios, made a big deal about Sub-Zero popping up as DLC, and 2 years after that, the Joker was DLC for Mortal Kombat 11. Fans actually pay to unite these properties. When's the last time you saw the Imperfects pop up? Never. They never did anything with them again, and why should they have? What incentive did Marvel have to associate themselves with this franchise? How could EA make another game without using Marvel's exposure? The legacy of these games is interesting. Of these two, Marvel Nemesis is the most likely to fade into obscurity and become only a fun anecdote nerds pull out to seem nerdier. Although I have seen some surprising interest in the game based on other retrospectives out there, it just isn't tied to anything current to keep it alive in the minds of even those who played it. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe may be a less interesting game, but it was certainly a more coherent one, which on its own merits wouldn't help it stand out much more, but its legacy can be felt in contemporary culture. There's no doubt the Injustice series is a direct result of MK vs. DC, which spawned a sequel of its own, a massively beloved comic book run, and a less beloved animated movie. The impact is still being felt today in both DC and NetherRealm projects. As far as I can tell, Marvel Nemesis was the first and only EA and Marvel partnership. A game I'm sure neither company cares about at all. At the end of the day, this game was designed to get DC fans into Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat fans into DC, and I think it really succeeded. It's just a damn fun game that gives both properties the respect they deserve, and delivers on some dumb action that can't be complained about. It's a game I remember fondly, and one I think deserves a bit more attention than it gets. The creation of Marvel Nemesis was a bold strategy, and I would have loved to see them pull it off. I want to express that I don't hate this game at all. I loved it as a kid, and I definitely thought the Imperfects were at least cool, and some even had glossy boobs, which I was just learning to be into. There's something about this game that has me thinking about it so much more than MK vs. DC, and I can't quite place why. I think it's because the potential was there to make something so unique and interesting. I wish I lived on the multiverse Earth where we did get a sequel and a sequel to that. I wish this strange franchise had gone on just out of sheer curiosity about what the next move would be. Would they go off into space in some crazy EA original sci-fi fighting game series? Would Marvel be tied in with a bunch of cosmic characters along for the ride? Would that ending just be scrapped and we get a sequel on Earth dealing with the alien fallout and a fresh batch of heroes? The ideas seem limitless, and I'm sure it would have been rough around the edges, but that's kind of the charm of the original to begin with. That's what both of these games have in common. Some genuine naivete in an era when superheroes and video games were just getting solid footing in the mainstream. And I think that's something worth remembering.